Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So ultimately, I'm trying to find the it factor of employability and character building stuff. And ultimately, I mean, making the best disciples of Jesus Christ that we can.
Mm.
And what I found, well, here's a quick story. We had one of the deans come into the communication department, and he was presenting a new class.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, okay, this class is going to have writing, it's going to have some humanities, it's going to have this. It's a general ed class. And I looked over the list. I raised my hand. It's like, are you going to teach them public speaking?
Mm-hmm.
He goes, we didn't even think about public speaking. I was like, are you serious?
In a communications class.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah.
And I'm like, all right. But then we have posters all over the place. Like, we graduate effective communicators.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, well, I don't know, do we?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what sparked the idea of like the sabbatical research.
Great.
And ultimately, that's my hypothesis, is communication's part of it. But really, I want to bring back to the table, this is what we need to be training the students for. It doesn't matter what discipline, it's just we need these things. And so I thought it'd be good to get your perspective.
Sure. It'll be a little unpolished.
That's all right.
If I'm going to be given answers off the cuff, they won't be good examples of public speaking. But shoot.
And it's ultimately not to uncover public speaking. It's just more of what are the characteristics, traits, and skills that people should have that they may be lacking.
Yeah.
So.
Great.
Okay. And I have about 10 questions.
Let's dive in. Yeah.
Okay. All right. When you observe people in court, computer went to sleep. What personal qualities tend to separate those who take personal responsibility for the actions versus those that do not?
Oof. All right. So I don't think I can start to answer that question without giving some background on what kinds of matters I see people on. So as a magistrate, I handle all the family law matters. I handle all the misdemeanor criminal matters and infraction criminals matters, and felonies through the preliminary hearing. So there's criminal matters and also juvenile criminal offenses. And then on the civil side, there's all the family law stuff, which is a huge part of what I do. But I also handle probate matters and mental commitments and name changes and adoptions and everything. So there's such a wide variety of things that I see people in that, in some of the matters that I see people on, there is no aspect of personal responsibility. Like, for example, a name change or a mental commitment. Nobody's done anything wrong there. They just have to be in court for one reason or another.
Sure.
And in other aspects, there are huge components of personal responsibility, like in criminal sentencings or in discussing custody plans going forward. Sometimes I need to know whether a parent recognizes their own personal responsibility so that they can have an effective approach to custody in the future or whatever. So I think that your question of, what makes the difference between somebody who takes personal responsibility and not is probably mostly speaking to criminal proceedings. That's how I understood it.
Okay.
So in those matters, if I'm doing a sentencing, let's say I'm doing a sentencing for domestic violence, because this is one area that this shows up a lot. After I hear from the prosecutor on what the state thinks the appropriate sentence should be, I hear from the defense lawyer, and then I say to the defendant, "Sir or ma'am, you get the last word. Is there anything you want to say before I sentence you?" Now, if somebody says, "No, thank you," that's not a bad answer, actually, in a sentencing, because very often I already have some idea of what I'm going to say for a sentence, and there is some non-zero chance that you actually make things worse for yourself by saying the wrong thing. But there's also a chance that you can make things better for yourself by demonstrating to me that you understand personal responsibility. Because one of the things that I'm looking for in that statement is whether this person really understands the harm that they've caused and their role in the harm. If they do understand those things, then I don't have to use the tools at my disposal, such as jail time or community service or fines or whatever in order to drive that point home.
Sure.
So basically what I'm looking for is, do you understand what you did wrong and how you can avoid it in the future? Because if you do, then you're well on your way to rehabilitation and to avoiding recidivism. If you don't understand those things, then I may have to have a role in helping you understand them. So if, for example, somebody were to say in their statement in a domestic violence sentencing, well, what happened was, she was getting after me, and, she was frustrating me, and or whatever. And they start immediately trying to put their actions in the context of, I was provoked by this person. Right. Or, she did something, or he did something, or something else interfered somehow with my ability to act freely. And I say, let me stop you right there. You retained your ability to act freely.
Yeah.
You retained your freedom of choice through this entire interaction. And at some point you chose to lose control, to respond out of anger or whatever. But that was a choice that you made. And if you continue to tell yourself this lie that you somehow at some point lost your choice, then you continue to insulate yourself from rehabilitation, right? And so I try to explain that in one way or the other. But that's when I see people who are not taking responsibility. On the other hand, sometimes people can say something like, Judge, that night I was feeling provoked. And I don't offer that as an excuse. I offer that in terms of context, but I recognize that my actions were my own, my decisions were my own, and I made a choice, and that's the choice that I'm being held responsible for now. That's the choice that produced these consequences, and I'm willing to accept them because it was my choice, whatever. You can find a way to say it in a way that shows personal responsibility. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but
because one thing that I teach is life skills, and that personal responsibility is huge. We call it stinking thinking.
Okay.
Or victim language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was talking this morning in treatment court to somebody about a victim mentality, and I said you might think that what I'm referring to is somebody who's a crybaby or something, but I'm not. I'm referring with a victim mentality. When I say that, what I'm talking about is somebody who believes that their choices don't matter. Yeah. That regardless of what they choose, their life will unfold a certain way. That is victim thinking. That's limited thinking. That's disconnecting your choices and their consequences. Now, this is something that I've come to realize over time. If I, as a judge, disconnect somebody's choices from their consequences, whether good or bad consequences, I am effectively sending them the message that their choices don't matter. And so it undercuts the empowerment of feeling like they're in control of their life. So let's say, for example, that somebody commits an offense or violates probation or commits a crime, and they come into sentencing, and I say, well, you did this, but I feel bad for you, so I'm not going to send you to jail. That seems like I'm doing them a kindness, but I'm not. Yeah. Because if I've done that, the message that I've sent them is that their choice is not connected to the outcomes of their life. And if somebody feels that, then I've sent them the worst possible message that I can as a judge. I've taken their control away from them. And the only way that people start making better choices is to recognize that they're in control of their outcomes. So sometimes as a judge, it can be very tempting, especially if you recognize that, the exercise of power, whether the power to dispense punishment, the power to put somebody in jail, the power to, or the power to give grace, the power to forgive, the power to give somebody another chance. Either of those exercises of power, they can both become addictive. Yeah. That's something that we learn in judge trainings, that you have to be careful, judicious with your use of power, because otherwise it can become something that serves its own purpose. And as you recognize that, it depends on which one of these two paths you are more inclined to, whether to use power toward punishment or to use power toward, giving people second chances. But either one can be, if out of balance, can be their own problem.
Yeah.
I am inclined to use power to the extent I feel that I can responsibly to try to give people second chances.
Yeah.
That can become a problem if, when I'm doing that, I'm disconnecting their actions from personal responsibility. And so that's something that I try to weigh every time if I'm going to give somebody a break of any kind.
Yeah.
I try to ask myself, by doing this, am I disempowering this person by disconnecting their choice from responsibility? Or, stated another way, from consequences, negative or positive, right?
Interesting.
I don't know if that's helpful.
No, it is. In fact, here's a follow-up question with that. When you get somebody that is, it appears that all choice is taken away, let's say it's a car accident.
Yeah.
You're minding your own business, somebody's texting and driving, they don't see that you're stopped at a red light and they run into you.
Mm-hmm.
It's 100% their fault. Do you still have responsibility in that from the accident and going forward?
Great question. So we don't always get to choose the things that happen to us, and things do happen to us, there's no question. Not every condition or circumstance in our life was chosen, or even was the result of a choice in at least a proximate cause sense. Now, you could say, well, it was the result of the choice because that person was at that intersection and they chose to be at that intersection. Okay, fine. But it was not foreseeable that by making that choice, they were accepting the responsibility of getting crashed into, right? So certainly, I think we need to recognize when you're talking about building a model of personal responsibility, you need to recognize, yes, there are some things that are outside of our control, circumstances or conditions. What then is your responsibility with respect to those circumstances or conditions? And I would give this example, and I've done it in court a million times. Life is like a Tetris game. You don't get to always choose the shape that comes down the pipe, but you do get to choose how to maneuver it and where to place it in order to be constructive toward a goal, right? That's easier said than done.
Yeah.
It's oversimplified. It's probably unfair to characterize all of life's circumstances that way, as if it were just some game that you get to turn, the death of a loved one or something like that and just say, well, I'm just going to build on this. No, I don't want to be so cavalier about it. It's not that easy. But ultimately, even when things happen that are totally outside of your control, that may appear at first to be quote unquote bad things, and the reason why I put that in quotes is because assigning a moral or a value of any kind to things that happen in our lives is probably a bigger, more sophisticated analysis than we can make as mere mortals.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like that story of the farmer that lost his horse, and the neighbors said, "Oh, you lost your horse, that's so bad." And he said, "Yeah, perhaps." And then the horse came back with other horses, and so now he had 5 horses, and the neighbor said, "Oh, that's great." And he said, "Yeah, perhaps." And then the next day, his son was training the new horses, trying to break them in, and he got thrown and broke his leg, and the neighbor said, "Oh, that's so bad." And he said, "Perhaps." And then the Imperial Army came to conscript all the young men for war, and they passed over his son because of his broken leg, and the neighbor said, "Oh, that's so great." And he said, "Yeah, perhaps." In other words, the farmer in this story, chose to exercise some patience in taking the long view on whether something was good or bad, and chose to withhold and suspend judgment and to say, I'm not going to assign a value to things.
Yeah.
All things can be good or all things can be bad. It really depends on how these kind of shake out in my life. And that part is up to us.
Yeah.
Getting crashed into in the intersection was not up to the person in your example, but choosing how to move that shape around and place it in their life in a way that's constructive is up to you.
Yeah.
That's where personal responsibility comes in. And if you don't make a choice, you've made a choice. So if you choose to passively allow those shapes to fall straight down exactly where they are, you're going to find you lose the game pretty quickly. If you don't take an active role in saying, how am I going to form this and put it into a place where it's constructive? But if you do that, if you get into that habit, you recognize I am still in control of my life to a certain extent, to a great extent, right? And as you do that and you position those circumstances which may appear negative at first, remember that perhaps story, but you put them in a way that you can build on them now or later, whether mentally, emotionally, psychologically, or whatever, and you combine that with trying to withhold judgment or suspend judgment on whether or not conditions are good or bad, you can watch for how these circumstances are actually somehow benefiting you.
Oh, cool.
And I think that if you are on the lookout for things, you find them. So for example, sorry,
That's okay.
if I ask you how many red trucks you saw on the way over this morning, you wouldn't be able to tell me. But if I told you I'll give you $100 for every red truck you see for the rest of the day, all of a sudden you're going to be watching for them and you will be able to count some red trucks.
Yeah.
It's just what you're motivated to see.
Yeah.
If you choose to see something in your life, you will see more of it. So if you combine those three things all together, right? One is you may not be responsible for all the circumstances and conditions of your life, but you are responsible for how you choose to classify them, where you put them in your mind, how you build on them. Two is try to withhold and suspend judgment of whether things are good or bad in the moment they happen, and try to open up the possibility that perhaps all things are working together for your good. And three being look for the good and you will find it. You combine all those three things, and I think that even though it's true that circumstances and conditions do happen outside of our control, we still have a lot of responsibility and power to build on them.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was a 30-minute answer.
13 minutes.
Oh, and by the way, I do not have anything else today, so I know you have calls on your time, but I don't,
Okay.
so we can take as much time as you need.
Good. Well, I was going to make sure I was right at half an hour.
No, you don't have to do that.
Interesting. As a side note, with that class that I teach, could I get your permission to use that in my class?
Sure. I mean, it's a little rough. If I were going to give it,
I'll edit
if I were going to give it as a speech, I would give it a lot more concise than that. But
I
yeah,
have to do that because it's interesting because, I mean, these are incoming freshmen coming in that their eyes are this big.
Yeah.
They are trying to figure stuff out. And one of my first lessons is personal responsibility. And it's interesting to look at it from this perspective. And the Tetris analogy is great.
yeah. I wish I could say I made it up. I didn't. I don't know where I heard it, but it stuck with me.
We'll give you that credit.
Okay, great. I'll take it.
We're good. We're good. Well, moving on. Let's see. What do you feel this coming generation lacks when it comes to being successful?
Oof, that's such a great question, because I think a lot of what immediately occurs to folks my age are things that actually do just come with age.
Yeah.
So we might think, oh, young people they just don't have the work ethic, or they don't have the understanding of delayed gratification, or they don't whatever.
Yeah.
A lot of those things, they just come as the brain bakes. And by the time that people are 25, 26, 27, they start to figure things out. And so a lot of the gripes I think that middle-aged and older people have with today's youth are actually just developmental frustrations that have existed since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
That, you go back as long as you want, you're going to see reports of older people saying the youth of today are lost because they, name your poison. But those things are mostly just, well, that's just immaturity, what you're talking about. So if you want to kind of parse it more and say, well, I'm talking about the youth of today. How is the youth of today different? First of all, something that interests me is the fact that for most of human history, your life was the same as your parents' life, and was the same as your grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. So if you're a youth in the year 1250, your life is the same as your great-great-grandparents who lived in, 1170 or whatever, or 1120 or whatever that generational gap would be.
Yeah.
It's really the same. You woke up, it was agrarian, and you found a person in your community and started a family, and that was it. Today's youth, their life is unrecognizable as an experience to their parents, and worse so to their grandparents, and completely foreign, alien to their great-grandparents. They could never have imagined. And so because of the speeding up of technology, it's almost not even possible to make a comparison, right? And so what do today's youth either lack or whatever? I think a lot of it is not their fault, but it would be that technology has changed the experience so much that I don't know that parents can give meaningful guidance, on how to deal with something like cyberbullying. Didn't happen when I was your age, I'm talking to my kid when I say that. Or the use of AI or AI ethics or whatever. Those things are changing the experience, the life experience of young people, and parents don't know how to give meaningful guidance on them. So I do think that they have had an effect, a dramatic effect on things like delayed gratification and on work ethic and on critical thinking and on impulsivity, because so many of us, and I say us, I'm including myself in that, live life in 60 to 90 second, online videos. And that's the training that we're giving to our brain in terms of attention span and in terms of how long can I wait for a dopamine hit before I need another one. And so in that sense, technology is combining with these kind of endemic, conditions of youth, which are natural impulsivity, natural inability to delay gratification, a natural impatience. And then that's gas on the fire to say, and now we have the technology to make that, all you need to do. You don't need to go out and grow food. You don't need to work from dawn until dusk. You don't. And those are good things that we've come out of that kind of age of having to constantly work to keep ourselves alive. But what's it left us with? It's left us with a lot of time. And we fill that time, unfortunately, with pretty meaningless doom scrolling, most of us. Yeah. So that's nothing new. I mean, everybody knows that's the problem, but we don't do anything to fix it.
Right, because we kind of join it in a lot of ways.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, as an adult, I spend a lot of time daily, more than I wish I had to admit, just checking out mentally by saying, well, let's watch a couple funny reels or whatever. There's no sin in that. There's no crime in that. Right. But it is training your brain. And I think that you need to always be asking yourself, am I training myself to be the kind of person that I aspire to be? Or am I training myself to be somebody different than what I want to be?
Yeah, and I think ultimately we're training ourselves so we don't know how to be bored, to just check out.
Totally. Don't know how to just be silent. Don't know how to be unentertained.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, because I think of it, all right, I've got homework to do, or doom scrolling. Well, this one's going to give me the dopamine hits. Dopamine,
just like that.
And it's just like...
And those neural connections, that neuroplasticity, that the brain training, it's well researched. The jury's not out. This is real. Yeah. And the more you do something, the stronger those connections are, period. And so it's an exponential effect to say, well, I'm going to, whenever I'm bored, whenever I'm feeling a craving for that dopamine hit, I'm going to turn to my favorite drug, which is my phone, and I'm going to get that dopamine hit, and it will pay off. And so in terms of behavioral conditioning, it's the perfect teacher because it pays off every single time, and it's pretty nefarious because it happens without us noticing. Pretty soon we're addicted to our phones. We're addicted anyway. Yeah. I'm just getting grumpy now, but to be clear, I'm talking about myself more than I'm talking about anybody else.
And I've seen that too, because I remember it's like, all right, I'm just going to relax. It's 10 o'clock at night by my bed. My wife falls asleep next to me. And then all of a sudden, 2 in the morning.
It's 2 in the morning.
Holy smokes.
It's 2 in the morning, man. You got to wake up at 6:30. Yeah.
That's interesting.
100%.
All right. Well,
You can keep going if you got more. If
I
if
do
you're
have-
out of time,
No,
then
I'm not out of time.
let's keep going.
I just got lawn to mow after this.
Okay, sounds good. It's a good day.
All right.
Do you like mowing the lawn?
I actually do.
I love mowing the lawn.
Right now, my wife and I are listening to Brandon Sanderson,
Okay.
The Way of Kings.
Yeah.
And you
You
have
just
to
pop
have,
that in and
Yeah.
Are
You
you-
have to have long periods of time. No,
Yeah.
I push my.
you push.
The riding lawnmower doesn't do the eye candy.
I think that's so important. I really think there's something that should be studied. It probably has been, but just lawn therapy,
Yeah.
especially for like middle-aged guys. I don't know why, but we just love to see those lines. I think part of it is just it's like an exercise in bringing order to chaos.
I think so.
You know?
And it gives you that instant gratification
Yeah.
because as soon as you're done, you can step back and it's like, this looks good.
It's done. I did
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And so much of what we do in life has such gradual, slow-moving, effects that you can't see that you've done anything.
Yeah.
You work day in, day out, and it's like, have I changed the world at all? Have I done anything?
Right.
Is my contribution matter? Do my efforts matter? And that constant grind, I think there's an itch that's scratched by mowing a lawn
Yeah.
or making a bed or something that's kind of like immediately like, oh, I can see I did that.
Yeah.
And it's better now than it was.
And it's hard because, like schooling, for example, you've got 4 years, and a lot of times going to that math class or this, it's just like, what's the point?
Yeah.
And you don't know until the 4 years is done, and then you're on the stage.
Right. I heard something somewhere recently that said something like, life must be lived forward but can only be understood in retrospect.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting because we have to live it forward.
Yeah.
And at the time we're living it, often we don't understand what effect any choices we're making. This goes back to that earlier answer. But what effect our choices are having ultimately not only on the outcome of our life, but on the meaning of our life.
Yeah.
Meaning is derived in retrospect when we look back and we can form a narrative. We can say, oh, my story was that I had to go here in order to learn this. And
Yeah.
I don't know.
When you connect the dots afterwards.
Right.
In fact, the Japanese, they don't think of life as like looking forward. They look at life as looking forward is actually looking back and walking backwards because you can't really see the future.
Oh, interesting.
And so they look at more of what they've learned and the mysteries of the future.
Yeah.
But yeah, they look at it more of walking
Yeah.
backwards. Than,
I love Eastern philosophy.
I know.
I've got the Tao Te Ching over there, and I read it sometimes, and I just go, man, I wish we dabbled more culturally in Eastern philosophy, because it is. I think there's some really good stuff in Taoism and Buddhism and those philosophies of just, kind of. Just well, I could get off on a tangent right now, but effortless action of. Movement like water through life instead of fighting against things.
Yeah.
But balancing that with kind of a Western idea of responsibility, which we talked about in the first answer. But that perhaps story, that's an Eastern philosophy story. That's a Buddhism story.
Oh.
The farmer with the, yeah. And if you want a good podcast, look into secular Buddhism. It's interesting. It doesn't view Buddhism from a religious or kind of deistic perspective, but it's Buddhism as a philosophy, as a life philosophy on how to interpret circumstances and make meaning from them.
I'll make note of that.
Yeah,
What'd you say?
secular Buddhism.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
All right. Well, what role do communication skills play in how people present themselves and explain their actions and resolve problems from your perspective?
So the reality is that communication is necessarily, it's the lens through which the thoughts, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors of one person are then, communicated to another person. So in any context, any of the contexts that I mentioned earlier, of all the things that I do in court, I am trying to understand what are, basically, I'm trying to connect my experience with the experience of another person, and they're trying to connect their experience with mine. So those thoughts, behaviors, attitudes, choices, and all the motivations and intentions that are wrapped up in those start up here. And then they have to find their way down here through the lens of language, which already limits them.
Yeah.
And for people who have less facility with language, it limits them even further. That's why facility with language, good mechanics, good vocabulary are all important. But then they have to travel through the sound waves to the ears of another person, me often, who then decodes them through my own lens of experience and understanding. And there may be certain things that they say that they're trying to communicate, which I, because of my own experience, reject. Maybe fairly, maybe unfairly.
Right.
So for example, if somebody starts to say in a domestic violence sentencing, well, my wife was making me real mad, there might be a block in my mind that says I'm not going to allow this person to blame his actions on the victim. And so I may stop listening at that point, and I may be waiting for them to take a breath to say, sir, I'm going to correct you right now. Now, is that good communication on my part? Is that fair? I don't know. I'm not here to answer that question, but it's true. It happens. So depending on how you communicate things, you're either opening doors or closing them in the mind of your audience. So you always have to consider audience. You have to consider, how is this going to sound when I say it? Is this going to open doors or close them, right? If they have a good lawyer, somebody who's appeared before me before, maybe their lawyer could give them a pep talk before they address the court. And they could say, hey, this judge is not going to like it if you try to victim blame. So just avoid anything that sounds like that, all right? Now that's a way that they can prepare their communication so that it'll be received better by their audience, right? But I mean, the bottom line is communication is central to everything that we do. Everything that happens that results in somebody going to jail, or results in somebody losing custody of their kids, or results in somebody, I'm trying to think through all the, benefiting from a huge will, or, losing contact with friends or family or whatever. All of those things happen because of communications that happen in court. That communication is written or verbal or nonverbal sometimes, right? I have been in sentencings where I've watched a person during the comments of counsel, and the person is perhaps rolling their eyes at something that is being said. Maybe during a victim statement, a defendant who's guilty of violence of some kind is snorting derisively or rolling their eyes or dismissive of the comments of a victim. That's nonverbal communication that's telling me this person does not recognize their responsibility in this act, and I'm going to have to use the tools at my disposal, jail, for example, in order to convey to them, if not their own responsibility, because they get to choose whether or not to accept that or not, but at least to convey to them there are consequences for what you did. Don't do it again or else you'll end up back in jail, right? So nonverbal communication is huge too, but I got to be careful with that, I've noticed, because some people have tics, nervous habits, even neurodivergence, which causes them to present in a certain way nonverbally, which I can misinterpret. And I have had a situation in the past in which I saw somebody acting nonverbally in a way that I thought was disrespectful and dismissive. And their lawyer noted, before I had a chance to address it with them, by the way, Judge, my client is neurodivergent in this way, and that causes him to have these kind of manifestations. And it changed my whole view of what this person was communicating. So I'm the first to say and acknowledge that although communication is central in everything I do, in all the decisions I make, in how I understand a person's, as I said, intentions, motivations, attitudes, actions, whatever, in how I understand those, communication is central. But I also recognize it's limited. It's imperfect. Even verbal communication. People say things that in a way that they didn't mean them.
Yeah.
They use the wrong words. And so I try to give grace for those, shortcomings of our ability to communicate.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the goal is, as a judge, I want to understand every person that sits in my courtroom perfectly. Can I? No, not even close. 100%, right? Ultimately, those who believe in cosmic justice, eternal justice, an afterlife, a God, etc., most of them believe that at some level, when the scale is finally being balanced, whatever that looks like in your tradition or in your mind, that you will be understood perfectly.
Yeah.
And that communication won't get in the way of that judgment somehow. That's not something we can do in this life.
No.
That's not something I can do. And I'm painfully aware that often when I am making decisions, I'm limited by the poor communication of
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, it's interesting because you kind of walk through the communication process, and it's, I always ask my students, all right, you got the sender, you got the receiver, is it communication yet? It's like, well, no, you've also got feedback and decoding on both sides.
Decoding,
And ultimately,
huge.
it's a cycle.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you look at every sitcom, every comedy thing,
They all depend on,
Yep.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
shortcomings.
where, like, the conflict happens because of miscommunication.
You're right.
And it's interesting because I loved how you portrayed that lens, because our brains live in a warm, dark place.
Yeah, no input except what they're told by
Exactly,
our
from
eyes,
the
ears.
five
Yeah,
senses.
exactly.
And it's got to interpret what's going on. And you mentioned that you may have tuned out and you didn't even know why, and that's because of like a paradigm effect that you've developed either when you're younger
Yeah.
or.
And sometimes those paradigms are well-founded,
Yeah.
and sometimes they're not. And so we get constant training as judges on unconscious bias
Yeah.
and on what prejudices we may bring to the bench, to where we may see somebody and interpret their communications differently than if they looked differently. And that's, honestly, that's terrifying. There was a judge here locally not too long ago who was blind, and I sometimes think, what an advantage that would be. Now, unfortunately, you can develop unconscious bias that manifests in 100 different ways.
Right.
It's not just through what you see; it's through what how you experience the world. And so I'm not sure how much of an advantage it would be. But sometimes I do wonder if I see somebody, for example, who presents as very well put together. Do I give them any kind of break because they're wearing a suit and they look good in the suit, or that they have a good haircut, or that they look perhaps affluent, or that they look well educated, or whatever I associate with that? Do I then assume that do I identify more with that person to say, oh, this person understands what I understand about domestic violence because they look like they're from the same educational background I'm from, so they get it.
Yeah.
They might not.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are things I try to remind myself.
Interesting. I love that. Well, I'd love to touch on public speaking skills. How important is it that skill is there when it comes to your job as a judge?
So, huge part of my job is public speaking. Huge part. And I don't know if I'm good at it or bad at it, honestly. And I'm not saying that to fish for any kind of compliment, but it's hit and miss. Sometimes I feel like, man, that was good. That was good. What I said in there, I could see it landing, But it's not, I almost never evaluate whether I've done a good job at public speaking based on what I said. I almost always evaluate it based on my read of whether it's finding its mark, right? So I may have said, used a stupid example, or I may have said something in an awkward way, but I can see that what I was trying to say, or at least I think I can see, was reaching somebody. And then I think that my exercise in public speaking was successful, right? Where I may use the most well-articulated, vivid formulation of perfect speech, but if somebody is falling asleep while I'm talking to them, then it doesn't matter.
Right.
And so the evaluation of whether public speaking is successful is entirely on whether it's finding its mark, not what you're saying. That's what I would say. I would say that public speaking is an underrated skill. I don't think it is required that everybody take public speaking classes in high school or college. It should be. I don't, things like drama, the dramatic arts, any kind of live performance, I think is great practice for being an effective communicator. But really, again, the skill that you're developing in live performance, and this goes back to what we were talking about. I did some stand-up comedy in college, and I did some improv comedy for several years, a few years ago. I still love it, but I don't do it regularly anymore. But the skill of live comedy, whether stand-up or improv of any kind, is a huge part of it is being funny, but an even bigger part is being able to read an audience. And this is what I found when I was a prosecutor, because I would do jury trials and I would walk in to a jury and it would be my job to demonstrate with evidence that somebody had committed a crime. And jurors come in with all kinds of different backgrounds and assumptions and beliefs and attitudes. And so we try in jury selection to understand what those backgrounds and experiences and beliefs and actions are. But ultimately, I've got to get 12 people in a felony trial to agree unanimously, beyond a reasonable doubt, that this person committed all of the elements of a crime. Now, if you're a defense lawyer, same thing. You've got to address, and I was never a criminal defense lawyer, but they have the same job, which is I need to connect with this audience. So either way, you need to take a room full, whether comedy or in trial, settings, you need to take a room full of disparate viewpoints, audience members, and say, I need to connect with you, all of you. So what connects with all of you, right? Is there an emotional or a sensory, a vivid way that I can I keep wanting to use the word paint, that I can demonstrate to you all what happened in this case, right? So that you can then follow a reasoning path to arrive at the same conclusion that I've arrived at. And so in trial work, as well as in comedy, I think that the hard skills are obvious, right? Kind of to be a comedian, you have to be funny. Yeah. You have to understand how jokes work, right? To be a trial lawyer, you have to be analytical. You have to understand how crimes and evidence work and the rules of evidence. Those are the baseline skills. But if you want to be a good comedian, if you want to be a good trial lawyer, if you want to be a good judge, you have to understand how to connect with people, how to read an audience in real time, and how to adjust and say, they're not getting this. They're bored. I'm seeing people falling asleep in my cross-examination of an expert. Time to wrap it up, and make that call on the spot. So, and if you're unable to do that, you're never going to be successful in these areas, no matter how analytical or smart or, well-articulated your speeches are.
Yeah, because you could have a memorized speech and just not get the audience.
Yeah.
So how important it is to get to know the audience?
So unfortunately, first of all, hugely important, but you don't have much of a chance in trial law. Like if you're a prosecutor or defense attorney in a criminal trial, you might sit there for 2-3 weeks presenting evidence, but you know how much time you got to get to know them? Usually a few hours. Yeah. And most of the time, honestly, lawyers don't do that very well. They waste that time, in my view, of the jury selection, which is the only time that you have to converse with the jury to get to know them, right? They waste that time. What are they doing? They are pumping their trial themes. They're trying to get the jury to agree with certain reasoning paths. Yeah. They're saying, hey, if I showed you this, you would agree with this, right? And it's like, use your time, get to know these people. Yeah. You're supposed to be looking for who are the jurors that are going to tank your case because of their attitudes and beliefs and experiences. Right. You're not finding them because you're not asking them any questions. You're lecturing to them, right? So anyway, that's a major problem that a lot of young lawyers fall into is, I'm going to lecture to the jury so that they agree with me before we start the case. No, you're supposed to use that time to figure out who they are, not to tell them who you are.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Interesting.
so knowing the audience is hugely important, but in comedy as well as in trial work, you don't get that opportunity much. And so you have to find a way to bring your emotional connection, the emotional connection of your presentation, your story, in other words, you have to find a way to tell that in a way that's universally appealing. If you know your audience, you can tailor it more narrowly. And you can say, look, I'm talking to a person who had a loved one that was hit and killed by a drunk driver. And so I can tailor my presentation in a drunk driving case to that person. That's easy. But if I don't know what this person's experiences are, I don't know, maybe they've been arrested for drunk driving. And so now, how am I going to tailor my presentation in a way that's going to reach them, right? So knowing your audience in that situation would be hugely important.
That would be. All right, well, I've got two more questions
Great.
for you. When you think about people who are most successful in your organization or industry in the courts, what qualities and characteristics or skills do they consistently demonstrate?
Okay, so you've got lawyers and judges, and that's a different skill set.
Okay.
There's a lot of overlap. There's transferable skills. The best, I think the best judges were good lawyers. But not all the best lawyers make the best judges, and not all the best judges were the best lawyers. Mm-hmm. So the Venn diagram has overlap, but it's not the same circle. Sure. So I think that some of the overlap is that the best lawyers and the best judges both have the ability for empathy, moral imagination, being able to put yourself in the shoes of another person. Because ultimately, both lawyers and judges have to do that. Lawyers have to be able to understand their clients, to understand their motivations, and then to present them in the best light possible, right? Judges have to be able to recognize, at least magistrates, have to be able to recognize that almost everybody who appears in our courtroom is at the worst moment of their life. And that they are going through a criminal action or a custody matter. They're worried about losing their kids in a child protection matter, and that they are scared, and that they are frustrated, and that they feel misunderstood, and they feel that the system is against them, and they feel that they don't speak the language, and they don't have the expertise, and nobody's on their side. And so for all of these reasons, they actually have something of an excuse for perhaps being emotional in court, or frustrated, or even short-tempered. I, as the judge, have all of the control in the courtroom. I understand the rules, I understand the language. I'm very comfortable in the physical space, right? I stand to lose nothing. I'm not going to lose my life, liberty, or children, right? And so what excuse do I have to lose control of my emotions, to get angry or frustrated? Really, I don't have an excuse. If I do that, it's because I chose to do it, right? And so one of the main kind of threads that runs through all of our answers here and my judicial philosophy generally is the persistence of choice. We have choice. And in fact, we can't escape choice. So as Jean-Paul Sartre said, we are condemned to be free. This is true, right? It's an existential philosophy that we may sometimes wish that we could claim or disclaim responsibility for our actions, but we can't, because our choices are our own, regardless of the circumstances that may limit them. Circumstances are the arena in which we exercise choice, but we still exercise choice. Yeah. So anyway, I forgot your question.
Okay, well, I love what you're talking about. So
let me get back to it though. What was the question?
The question was, when you think about the people who are most successful in your
Most
organization.
successful, I remember. So for judges, I really do think that a good judge does have all the baseline skills of, this is an analytical thinker, and they have the ability to keep their eye on the ball of what's relevant and say, hey, look, I'm looking for these elements in a crime, and all this other drama I don't need to know, right? Or I am looking for these factors under the statute of what's in the best interest of a child. Or I am, I'm looking for these elements of whether a will was validly executed or whatever. That's analytical thinking.
Yeah.
And then strong communicator, strong writer, and strong speaker, right? Because I need to not only show my work for an appellate court and show how I got to the result that I got to. That's important communication. But I also, at the same time as I'm doing that, I want to be persuasive. I want the party that I'm ruling for and the party that I'm ruling against to understand, and at best to say, yeah, that's a reasonable decision. Now, the party that I'm ruling against may never feel that way about what I'm doing, but at least they'll know how I got there. The appellate court will know how I got there. So communication includes not only being able to write that analytical reasoning in a coherent way, but also, or to say it in a coherent way, but also in a persuasive way. Those are the hard skills. Yeah. But as I said, the things that take a judge from good to great, that bring them above the baseline, is not just those hard skills of analytical thinking and good communication. It's also that moral imagination, being able to empathize or put yourself in the shoes of another person. And in my view, and I've said this a number of times in speeches on campus, because I've spoken to the English department a few times, and in all of those events, I always talk about the value of exposure to a broad canon of literature. It doesn't need to be literature, it can be movies, it can be whatever, but experiencing the stories of people who've lived lives different than your own. A lot of the folks in our culture live in a somewhat insular life experience, or they have a somewhat insular and homogeneous life experience. Not everybody, certainly not everybody, right, but a lot of people. And because they're all gathered into a single university campus, they may start to mistakenly believe that everybody in the world, in fact, has lived this same life or has these same beliefs, attitudes, and experiences. And nothing could be further from the truth. Get outside of the bubble and you'll see that, in fact, people have all kinds of different experiences that cause them to see things differently than they do. And this was my experience in going to law school. I went to undergrad at BYUI, but I went to law school in Cornell in upstate New York. And I was exposed to all kinds of different worldviews that I'd never really considered before. And all of a sudden, I was exposed to these worldviews in a way that was not only coherent, but also persuasive, right? That I thought, oh, wow, that's a really good point. I'd never thought about that. So that moral imagination you can get through exposure to, as I said, literature, stories, movies, whatever, that give you the chance to live 1,000 different lives, to live the life of, you take Jim Hawkins from, Treasure Island or whatever. You're never going to be a cabin boy on a boat that's taken over by pirates. So why is it valuable to review that story? You're never going to be Huck Finn on the river with Jim. You're never going to be Anna Karenina, as a aristocratic, Russian woman during that time that's navigating family crisis. But you are going to have, and you'll be exposed to, moral decision making that mirrors each of these characters. And so you get to see them do it, and you get to see what their process is, and you get to see what the results are of their decisions, and whether they bring happiness or misery, whether they bring pain or whatever. And so as you see that, it's rewiring your brain. Your brain doesn't know the difference, really, between your own experience and the vividly depicted experiences of others, whether they're fictional or real.
Right.
And so you can benefit from that brain development of, I've lived 1,000 lives,
yeah,
right? Can I be wise enough? Yeah.
because we could go, wake up, do the same thing every day, go to school, interact with the same people and stuff, and we develop this view on the world.
Yeah.
It's just very...
And then how do you judge when somebody comes to you and says, I have an experience completely foreign from yours, and it caused me, my experience, all contributed in 1,000 different, tributaries to a basically a confluence of me doing this one thing where I, drank to excess or smoked marijuana or, punched a person or whatever. How do you then judge if you've not had those experiences? Right. And I have to honestly say, in most cases where I'm called upon to judge, that I haven't had the same experiences as this person, and I don't really understand their decision making. Probably they don't, because a lot of it's subconscious. Right. But I have enough exposure to moral decision making that's foreign from my own experience through literature, movies, and things like that, that have helped me to be able to develop moral imagination and empathy. And so I can see that if somebody is struggling with substance use disorder, that choosing not to drink that drink or use that substance is a different choice for them than it is for me. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I love that, because it goes back to personal responsibility, but it's also emotional intelligence. And I love that, because I've never heard that phrase before.
Moral imagination, yeah. Yeah, actually, I can't remember where I heard it, but when I heard it and when I heard it described to me, it's another way of saying empathy. Yeah. But I like it better than empathy, because I think empathy is a little bit misunderstood, and I like the way that moral imagination it kind of breaks it down more. Yeah. Maybe it's the same thing, but it feels a little bit different to me.
Well, it feels a little bit more true, because empathy means I understand what you're going through.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
Yeah. And that's why actually you always want to be careful when you say to somebody, I understand what you're going through, if in fact you haven't. Yeah. So let me give just two things here. Sorry. No, so one is termination of parental rights. Mm-hmm. So this is in child protection cases. Extremely emotional cases, sometimes involving abuse of children, but more often involving parents that just can't do parenting. Mm-hmm. They're not actively trying to harm their children through sexual or physical abuse. Those are kind of the easy cases. It's like, well, let's get these kids out of there. Done. Now I say easy. I just mean in terms of decision making. Right. Those are harder emotionally, but easy decisions, right? But the harder decisions are when you've got parents who maybe they're trying, but their best efforts just aren't good enough, and the children remain in danger, or they remain dangerously neglected, or whatever. Those are hard cases, because in the end, if you do determine by clear and convincing evidence that it's in the children's best interest that their legal relation to their parent be severed, and that those parental rights be terminated, that action has such finality and such far-reaching effects. I've heard it described as worse than death for a parent, worse than the death of a child, because at least with the death of a child, if you can even say that phrase, but at least with the death of a child, that child is no longer there to be hurt or disappointed or confused by your actions or inactions as a parent. You can't, as a parent, you can't reach out and apologize or reach out and try to fix it or whatever. And so there's a finality that actually brings some closure in that situation, where with termination of parental rights, that child may be just across town, but you're not allowed to reach out to them, depending on the wishes of their new custodian, right? And so in a situation like that, you may have a mother who has been unable to, discharge the duties of parenting for long enough that they lose all at once, not one child to a car accident, not two children, but maybe 3 or 4 or 5 children on the same day. And not only does that person lose all of their children in a stroke of a pen, but there's no social support for them. Nobody's, Relief Society's not bringing them dinners to say, hey, you lost your kids. You know, there's no recognition, there's no social recognition of their loss. In fact, their loss is shamed and shameful to them. So they don't tell anybody. They go through that alone. So now why am I saying this? Just to make you feel bad about people who lose their kids? No. It is to recognize that even in those situations where society finds it so easy to judge, read the comments on any story about a crime and watch people immediately jump to this person should be killed, this person should be, you know, whatever, especially regarding mistreatment of children. And I understand the outrage, but have the moral imagination to consider the difficulties somebody's going through.
Yeah.
Does this make it so that I should then, as a judge, insulate them from the consequences of their action? No, that's where we started.
Right.
I need to make sure that I don't, in fact, disconnect somebody's actions from consequences, because otherwise I've sent the message they're not in control of their life. But as a good judge, I would hope that I can at least understand that even if I am effecting justice and doing what's in the best interest of children in my court, I'm still devastating someone, you know. And the other thing that I was going to say is, as a judge, one of the things that some people don't understand is that I do not sit in judgment of people. I sit in judgment of facts. And that's one of the things that a judge says in jury instructions. They say to a jury, you will be sitting in judgment of the facts, right? You're not here to judge a person. You can't. I can't judge a person. And, you know, as the lyric says, only God can judge me, right? And it's not my job to try to judge somebody as good or bad, or even moral or immoral or anything like that. But I can tell you if you broke the law, because that's a factual question.
Right.
And after I've decided that somebody's broken the law, or after a jury has decided, I can apply in an analytical framework the objectives of sentencing to my understanding of that person's attitudes, beliefs, intentions, whatever, and their own understanding of personal responsibility. And I can say, based upon the objectives of sentencing, which are the protection of society, deterrence of further crime, both to the individual themselves and to the general public, rehabilitation and retribution, I can consider those objectives against what I understand your mental state to be, using moral imagination, and I can try to fashion a sentence which I think will best promote those objectives. Do I always get it right? No. Because every step along that path has leak points, imperfections. But yeah, anyway.
No, it's, yeah, I love that.
I'm hoping that you have some kind of AI program that can make some coherent sense of everything I've said and say,
we'll
oh,
see. I'm
his,
learning.
yeah, you know, he had 3 major themes. They were these, because I've been all over the map, so sorry about that.
It made me think, because you talked about moral
Imagination. Yeah.
I wonder if there's a close tie to emotional imagination too.
Well, I think there is, and you know, my dad taught philosophy on campus,
Okay.
and English and critical thinking and technical writing and all of these kind of left-brained analytical skills. And my mom was a nurse and a caregiver, had 10 kids, and she did hospice work and stuff, and very emotionally in touch. And so I like to kind of flatter myself by thinking that I got equal parts of the left brain and the emotional, or whatever, I don't know what modern sociology or neuroscience calls it, but the left brain and the right brain of being able to say, yeah, I can go through the facts and I can determine, check, you meet all the elements, you've committed this crime, you are guilty. That's the left brain analytical side, kind of the engineer brain or whatever. But then on the right side, I can say, I can exercise moral imagination, I can exercise empathy and emotional connection.
Relate with people.
Yeah, and you know, I can say in that moment of sentencing, I understand you at some level. You know, I don't understand everything about you, but I understand you at a human level, and I can see that you're going through something, and I want to be there to try to help you come out the other end of that better rather than worse. One of them, and I don't know where this fits in your questions, but it's one of the main things that I think in my philosophy, my judicial philosophy, so I'm going to say it here,
Yeah.
which is that, you know, if you have a brand new Ferrari off the lot and somebody, you know, is going to get in with muddy shoes, you're going to say, whoa, 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 take your shoes off or something, or don't get in. I'm taking care of this car,
Yeah.
right? You're going around a curb and you can see all the black scuffs on the curb where people have bumped it, and you go, I'm going to slow down, I'm going to give it wide berth, I'm going to be careful, whatever. You're going to make sure that you're careful with that car. But if you have a 1984, you know, Toyota pickup with dents and dings and scratches and a cracked windshield and mud all over the dash and the faded paint and everything, you don't care who gets in that car.
Yeah.
You don't care if they have mud on their boots, and you don't care if you get into a parking lot and some car opens their door and they ding you, you go, whatever, right? So this is the judicial philosophy part. If you see yourself as an old beater truck, you won't take care of yourself. You won't choose friends that matter. You won't make choices that are healthy for you. You won't try to go through the process of substance use recovery because you don't care about yourself. And even worse, you might have contempt for yourself. You might hate yourself.
Yeah.
And if you hate yourself, you're really going to try to hurt yourself, right? But if you see yourself as the Ferrari, you're going to take care of yourself. You're going to say, it matters who I hang out with. It matters that I go to the programming that's going to try to help me get better. So if I've got somebody sitting in the chair for sentencing, maybe they've done something terrible. Maybe they beat up their wife or something. But if I just sit there and tell them, you are garbage, you are irredeemable, there's nothing good about you, and you know, they're going to leave there thinking, there's no point in me trying. Now, I'm giving myself too much credit because I don't have that power over somebody's self-image.
Right.
But there is some power that comes with sitting on the bench in the robe with the flag behind me, and the power of the state, the power of jail.
Yeah.
There's some power that comes with what I'm saying. And if I'm giving them the message that they are garbage, they will continue to act like garbage. If I'm giving them the message that, hey, you did something, and I want to be careful.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say you made a mistake, because that's different. That takes responsibility out of their hands.
Yeah.
I'm going to say you made a choice, and your choice has consequences. Some of those consequences are to other people. It hurt other people, right? It hurt your kids when they saw you hit your wife, right? It hurt their brains forever. Those are consequences that are real. And some of those consequences are to you. You're going to go to jail. You are going to do 52-week domestic violence program. You're going to be on probation. You're going to check in. Those are your consequences. But despite those consequences, you are still a worthwhile individual.
Love that.
You are not garbage. You did a garbage thing, but you haven't lost your value. You haven't lost your ability for redemption, and I don't say that in court in a spiritual sense, but in a societal sense. You can be who you want to be, but you just need to make different choices. You're also going to have to go through your consequences.
Yeah.
But who you are is going to be dictated by your choices, not by anything I say up here. So anyway.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. That's neat. And I hope you do take opportunities to teach people that, because that sounds fun.
I try to, but as you can see, the speeches start to get long. I'm one of the things that, you know, you're talking about public speaking, and I'm up here kind of saying, yeah, I'm real good at public speaking. The thing that I am worst at with public speaking is that it can get away from me.
Yeah.
And that's one of the dangers of being a judge, because nobody will stop you. Nobody will interrupt you.
That's true.
Nobody will say, you're out of time. And if you get real used, you get real used to just saying, I can talk as long as I want. And until I can see that, like I said earlier, until I can see that my lecture is reaching this young person, or this mom, or this dad, or this person, this criminal defendant, I'm just going to keep talking. You know, then it's like, whoa, those speeches get real long. So, got to keep an eye on that.
All right. Well, last question. If you were to advise your 17-year-old self, and you wanted to be hired, be successful, eventually be promoted, become what
Yeah.
you really would like to be, what would you tell yourself to develop first, and why?
That's a great question. Because what I would tell myself might be different than what I would tell any other 17-year-old, because I know myself and I understand myself and I know who I was when I was 17. I think some people at 17 need to hear that they are better and more valuable and more worthwhile than they might think. And I think some people need to hear, pump the brakes. You're not quite as good as you think. You know what I mean? And I don't know on any given day which of those ends of the spectrum I might fall on, but I often think to myself when I look at the blessed and happy state that I sometimes feel that my life is in, I think, man, if Jeannie had appeared to 17 or 18-year-old me and said, let me give you a glimpse of life when you're 43 and you tell me if you want it. And if I could have seen my life right now, I think I would have said, yeah, I want it. Let's do it. Which is a tremendous feeling. I mean, I don't know that everybody feels that way about their lives. In fact, I know that not everybody does. And so it's a huge thing to just practice kind of gratitude in that way, to say like, my life really is great and has turned out great. So what would I say to 17-year-old me?
Because the way I look at it, because I'm the same way.
Yeah.
I love my job.
Yeah.
I love everything I
Yeah.
do.
How lucky you've been. Yeah.
But what could I tell myself to get there faster?
Yeah. And so part of me gets stuck on the logistics of the question of like, well, if I say anything, I'll screw up, it'll change the space-time continuum, Marty, and so like, I don't want to do that. So I just don't say anything. Just leave him, let him do his path, because I know it ends up good. But there are things that would have been helpful for me to hear, certainly. So I will say this is a little off topic again, but I think it's important. Regarding charting a course, I saw somebody do something in a speech once that I thought was really effective, and I've used it a number of times myself, both in court and out of court, of where they had a volunteer come up from the audience, and they had a whiteboard, and they gave him a marker, and they said, all right, I want you to start right here, and they drew an X, and they said, go ahead and start right there, and I want you to draw. And the person said, draw what? And he said, I'm not going to give you any more instruction. And so he just started drawing circles, spirals, just did this for a while, And then the person waited 15 seconds and then said, all right, stop. And then he drew another X on the other side of the board. And he said, now don't pick up your pen. He said, I want you to go from where you are to this X as fast as you can. And what did he do? Straight line. And he said, that's the difference between having a goal and not having a goal. And he said, once you had a goal, you were able to move confidently toward the goal directly. He said, before that, you were going in circles. And he said, this is a simple demonstration, but the insight is profound. If you are wandering in your life without a goal, you're going to go in circles. You have no direction. And you might be able to, in retrospect, find meaning in that time, but ultimately, that part of your story is wandering in the wilderness, right? If you know where you're going, you can chart a straight course. So I was really lucky because when I was in college, I decided I wanted to be a judge. That's really early to decide that you want to be a judge. But once I decided that, I knew, okay, I need to go to law school. I need to get exposure to civil law and criminal law. And so this is how I'm going to do it. And I made a plan, and I did it pretty much as fast as one can do it because I knew where I was going. So it was a straight line. And, the part about developing the skills along the way, the things that we've talked about, moral imagination and public speaking and presentation, persuasion, connecting with an audience, whatever, all those things, I didn't really pursue those skills deliberately. So I wasn't like, I want to learn how to read an audience so I can be a better judge, so I'm going to do comedy. That's not why I did that. I did comedy because I wanted to do comedy. And in the meantime, I learned how to read an audience, right? Same thing with improv and same thing with trial work, really. Moral imagination came through exposure to literature. I was an English major in college. It came through exposure to stories in movie form or whatever. I love movies for that reason, right? To be able to live those lives, whatever. And so I don't know that I would tell myself as a 17-year-old, hey, you need to develop moral imagination. So I want you to read these books, I don't know that I would tell myself that. Developing skills that contribute ultimately to your success in your field, sometimes you just bring what you have to your field. You bring your life experiences and whatever skills you've developed. Sure, I would say to any 17-year-old, find exposure to lives unlike your own, whether through literature or movies or whatever. But listen to people. Open your mind to other people's viewpoints and experiences, yes. But I don't know that I would tell a 17-year-old that. I don't know if it would make a difference. Yeah. And on public speaking, yeah, I mean, in high school I did speech and debate. After high school I did drama and I did comedy. This live performance gave me all of those senses of how to connect with an audience. But I did those things because I wanted to do them, not because I wanted to learn the skills from them.
Right.
I've taken a lot of time and I haven't answered your question. What I would tell my 17-year-old self, in terms of becoming that person skill-wise, right, that I want to be, yeah, I don't know. In terms of, as I said, there's the hard skills and the kind of the soft skills that make the difference. Hard skills are the analytical thinking, the writing, the communication, and the soft skills are that empathy and that ability to connect with people. I would encourage my younger self to do all the things that I did anyway. Okay. Are there things that could have helped me be even better sooner? Yeah, probably. But really, I think probably the answer you'll get most often to this kind of question is people saying, I would tell myself that it's all going to be okay, that don't worry, that you can have the courage to be yourself, choose good friends. These things are all true. These are the things I would. Yeah, but have self-confidence. You're a worthy person. You're a worthwhile person. You have a lot to give to this world, and show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. That's what I would tell my 17-year-old self. Yeah, I would say, surround yourself with people that lift you up. Be the best version of yourself. Motivation doesn't do it. You got to find discipline. So choose things that you're going to commit to and do those things. All of that stuff is, the self-help literature is replete with all those things. And I think that's because self-help literature is not going to say build these skills. It's going to say be this person. And that person is somebody who thinks they're a Ferrari, ultimately, that they're worthwhile. That's what I would tell my 17-year-old self.
I like that.
And we've come full circle.
We have. Okay.
An hour and a half, kind of. An hour and 10 minutes or something like that. And that was on me. That's not on you. I very much enjoyed our conversation.
No, and I do too. It's interesting because there are some. It's like 30 minutes done. Let's get out.
No,